I'm Jacob. A few years ago, I had this silly idea to design and build a kayak that combined different aspects of sea kayaks, whitewater playboats, slalom kayaks, and surf skis. Yeah, so pretty much a unicorn. Well, it worked! And the first CHIMERA was created. The kayak paddled great, did exactly what I designed it to do, and got a lot of looks at various races, and the build video got thousands of views on YouTube. In fact, there really wasn't anything wrong with the original boat. But that's not to say that there wasn't room for improvement. Could this design be changed to be faster, lighter, more comfortable, and just as eye-catching? Maybe, but definitely worth a try. Plus, it was fun building the first anyway, so why not make a second? So I started with revisiting the very first step, back to the actual design process. Instead of doing the entire design process through Adobe Illustrator and faring by eye, I started by roughing out the design using Kayak Foundry, software developed for designing and building wood strip canoes and kayaks. This gave a good idea of the overall shape I wanted, the cross-sectional profiles, plus some first-order drag and stability calculations. From there, here are some of the big and small design changes I made from the first version. The length was shortened from 20 feet to 18 feet. Less length would make the kayak more maneuverable, fit in the garage better, easier to carry off the water, and in theory, be lighter with 2 feet less of material in the boat. The beam was narrowed from 18.5 to 17.25 inches. Though this would make the kayak less stable, it could translate into more speed and less drag. The bow and stern were both narrowed considerably to more match the profile of a sprint kayak. The planing surface of the hull was narrowed just slightly to match the narrower beam. I added a little more bow rocker. The first version tended to catch a few more weeds than I'd like. The profile of the cockpit area was changed a little bit to accommodate the knees better, and a couple build process and material changes. I'll be using 3/16 inch Polonia strips instead of 1/4 inch. For fabric, I'm going to go with 4-ounce S-glass for the exterior and 5-ounce carbon for the interior. The carbon should add stiffness to the boat, and I think it'll just look cool. And I'm going to pay more careful attention to the temperature of the epoxy during the glassing stages. A good working temperature for the epoxy will help it flow better, saturate the wood and the cloth better, and in theory, I'll be using less epoxy. So hopefully all these changes will bring about a lighter, faster boat. So let's get started. There's a considerable amount of work that needs to be done before I can actually start building the kayak, beginning with prepping the garage workshop. This started out like any other good project, with a trip to the box hardware store to get materials for making the stations and forms that I'll use to build the actual kayak. Earlier, I had the local copy shop print out all the forms on some drafting paper, and using a couple panels of 1/2-inch MDF, it was a fun cut and paste project to get the paper forms glued onto the panels. With all the paper forms glued to the MDF, I rough cut the forms with the jigsaw. And then the bandsaw to get a little closer. This process would go much faster with either a shorter kayak and fewer forms, or if I was cool and had a CNC machine. But, alas, I am uncool. Of course, the forms don't have to be perfect. Varying the actual shape of the kayak happens after the strips are all attached. The forms really just hold the strips in place and provide internal support before fiberglassing. And finally, I took a belt sander to the edges of the forms to get the shapes good enough for government work. With the forms complete, it's time to build all the structure that will support these, starting with the kayak building workbench. We had moved since building the original CHIMERA, so this is a good chance to set up a more efficient workspace. Instead of using a 16-foot long strongback, I have a solid MDF and 2x4 workbench. This rests on top of some sawhorses, and then I can use shims to make sure it's perfectly level. To the workbench, I attach blocks every 12 inches that will hold vertical 1x6 boards to which the forms will eventually get attached to. Then comes the meticulous task of setting up all the forms. On the paper printouts, I included a vertical and horizontal guideline on each form. These lines crossed along the approximate center line of the kayak, and using a cross laser level, I can use those guidelines to set the forms in the exact right orientation. And starting at the stern, it was a process of clamping the form in place, getting it just right so the guidelines match the laser level, and attaching the form with some screws. And repeating this process a lot. Once the forms are all in place, I wrap them in packing tape. Otherwise, the strips could get glued to the forms and the kayak would be unnecessarily heavy. Finally, I shape the interior bow and stern blocks. These will provide a spot for the strips to attach at the ends of the kayak. Since these will be part of the boat's wood core, they're taped to the outside of the bow and stern forms to be held in place until the strips start going on. Up until now, the full shape of this kayak was really only in my head and in 2 dimensions on paper. But with the form set up, it's pretty cool to see the boat starting to materialize. This thing is going to look great. And that about does it for setup. In the next episode, we'll get out and prep the wood strips and start building the actual kayak. Thanks for watching.